Sandra, my beautiful wife, was very playful tonight while we lounged on the couch, host dinner. She jumped onto my lap and showered me with kisses and hugs. Her cheerful demeanor was more evident than usual, known as Donna, among friends. I met Sandra more than 5 years ago and we just celebrated our 4th wedding anniversary. Our paths intersected shortly after Wright's discharge from the Marines. During my military service, I became deeply involved in weight training and self-defense. ES culminated in a year-long duty as a drill instructor, where recruits were molded into resilient soldiers. It was a thrilling experience for those who had ambitions beyond the military. After leaving the service, I invested my savings from 4 years in creating my own gym and fitness training business. The business took off quickly, occupying all of my time as I put myself into its expansion and assisting others in their fitness journeys. Standing 6 feet 4 and weighing 255 pounds in muscle, I instilled faith in my clients by guaranteeing them that I could help them alter their bodies. It was quite rewarding to see them transform from self-doubting persons to confident, strong creatures in just 6 months. Sandra, the sister of one of my clients, and I got along quickly. Despite her contrasted stature, she stands 5 feet 4 and weighs 145 pounds less than me. We formed an unusual but charming partnership for just 110 pounds. Sandra projected a delicate innocence at 22, whereas I, at 26, carried the weight of more life experiences. Although she was not interested in training, we enjoyed spending our free time together doing shared interests. Our closeness got stronger, resulting in an exclusive relationship and eventual marriage. 1 year later, Sandra proved to be an amazing lover, attentive and caring, meeting all of my requirements with steadfast dedication. Her charming innocence was one of the many things I admired about her. While some may misinterpret her vivacity for flatness or dismiss her as a stupid blonde, I found her charming. She did, however, occasionally exhibit a lack of common sense. As a fit and attractive health trainer, I was constantly approached by female clients. It became a constant fight to maintain limits, so I installed video cameras throughout the gym to protect against bogus charges of sexual assault from rejected suitors. I took these safeguards to protect both my business and my reputation, allowing Sandra to remotely monitor the gym's activities for further peace of mind. Sandra understands the depth of my attachment, and I always show my love for her. Financially, we are secure. My firm is thriving, and Sandra's profession as a real estate agent helps complement our income. Sandra's light-hearted nature reached new heights last Sunday afternoon, when we lounged in the living room with a bottle of wine. She laughed uncontrollably, startling me by jumping onto my lap and showering me with loving kisses reminiscent of a carefree teenager. I couldn't deny the warmth that poured through me. Her care always made me feel valued. However, our peaceful moment was abruptly interrupted when Sandra, her hand lovingly stroking through my hair, smiled that heartwarming smile and quietly delivered a bombshell. "Sweetheart, Matthew was going to take me out to supper next Friday night. You are cool with it, right?" It took me a while to digest her words. Initially, I brushed it off, enjoying her brilliant smile. When my silence persisted, she repeated her query with a lovely tone. "You don't mind, correct?" Confusion clouded my head as I attempted to understand. "Sandra, what are you asking me?" "I apologize, but I don't entirely understand your foolish." She chuckled quietly. "Matthew from the office invited me to dinner next Friday, and while I may have consented," as her words sank in, my initial astonishment gave way to understanding. Disbelief lingered. "Wait, You want my permission to go on a dinner date with Matthew next week? It isn't an actual date. Just dinner and maybe a movie, she promised, her tone light yet tinged with expectation. I sat there astonished, my mouth gaping with amazement. Could this be true? Was my loyal wife the embodiment of my love and fidelity, truly requesting my permission to go on a date with another man? Sandra, that is exactly what a date entails. Are you serious about going out with someone else? I was able to communicate while attempting to comprehend the magnitude of her request. He's only a colleague, Donnie. We have a wonderful rapport at work and he constantly makes me grin. It's not like a regular date, more like beers after work, but in this case, dinner and movie. She clarified her tone, seemingly unaware of the significance of her remarks. My mind whirled, how could she not understand the immensity of her request? Sandra, I've never contemplated the idea of being with another lady. How can you possibly consider getting out with another man? Donnie, please do not be jealous. He's not like you. And it's only one evening. My sentiments for you are unchanged. He means nothing to me. But I want to do it. I hope you aren't upset, she pleaded. Her comments fell on shocked ears. Madness threatened to consume me, but years of military training helped me remain calm as I quickly formulated a plan. Ah, you have already agreed. I see. I murmured, seeming to comprehend as I reached for my cell phone. Sandra, still sitting on my lap, mindlessly fiddling with my hair. I dialed the number of a persistent suitor who had been after me for months. Hello, Mary, I'm Donnie. I spoke into the phone, noticing my wife's confused expression. I am doing great. Thank you. Is that offer still valid? For Friday night? This is wonderful. My wife just mentioned that she is interested in an open marriage, and you immediately came to mind. It sounds like fun. I'll meet with you this week to plan everything out. Bye. Sandra gripped her hair rubbing and gave me a perplexed look. Who is Mary? She is one of my clients. We have a wonderful rapport, and she is quite hilarious. So we're going out on Friday night as you recommended. I explained nonchalantly. To my amazement, Sandra's demeanor changed to one of rage, and she quickly vacated my lap, releasing a torrent of accusations. I couldn't understand how she failed to see the contradiction in her request as she shouted at me. I cannot believe you are going out with a girl. Most likely a promiscuous lady. Danny, I am certain I will not tolerate your adultery. That is intolerable. I responded, trying not to laugh too much. However, it is entirely fine for you to go out with a coworker. It is different. She replied vehemently. How is this so? I pressed. She insisted that it was simply a night out for fun. That is exactly what I will be doing as well. Listen, Sandra. I've never wanted another woman until you suggested this open marriage a minute ago. Do you honestly believe I would sit idly by while you went on a date? Sandra looked at me with a mixture of regret and frustration. I pressed forward, determined to face the matter head-on. You started this, and we are going to see it through. You will have your rendezvous with Matthew in our company, Mary. Whatever happens is beyond our control. However, I hope we can preserve our relationship and marriage beyond Friday night. Until then, I will be staying in the guest room, and any intimacy between us is out of the question. The very concept of you wanting another man hurts me too much to even consider being close to you at the moment. I don't feel anything for you. Sandra's tears mixed with her rage. A sight that would normally cause me to offer consolation, but not under these conditions. After giving her a few moments to recover herself, I kept my tone firm. Beginning next week, I will attend counseling to figure out why I feel inadequate to you. If you can help me see where I fall short, maybe we may save our marriage. But let's be clear, you now bear full accountability. The thought of you yearning for another guy tempts me to abandon our marriage immediately. But I'm prepared to confront this maturely. Our future depends on Friday night and her feelings thereafter. Remember, Sandra. Whatever happens as a result of your decision to pursue the state with Matthew, I have no intention of changing my plans, and you'll have to deal with the consequences whatever they may be. Sandra fled the room, tears streaming down her cheeks, speechless. It wasn't long before I heard her on the phone with her sister, which was exactly what I expected. Sandra returned an hour later, assuming her mask of sweetness and innocence, implying that her sister's answer was anything but encouraging. I remained attentive, immune to her deception attempts. Sweetheart, I may have made a mistake by getting out with Matt. I have chosen to cancel it. I don't want to be with anyone else, she admitted. Sandra, that is totally your decision. But you've set something in motion, and I'm determined to see it through. You can opt to go out or stay at home. I won't cancel my arrangements with Mary. You made your desires very obvious and purposefully caused me anguish. The only way forward for me now is to see where this leads. Perhaps you are right. And we do need to try dating others and fully accept an open marriage. However, you must remember that your decisions will always have consequences. It was your decision. Remember, you accepted his invitation without consulting me. That hurt, and it is not something I can simply forgive. I asserted firmly, hoping to elucidate once more. Sandra begged with Danny. It wasn't actually a date. You need to believe me. It was an informal after-hours meeting. It is not noteworthy. I will cancel it. Can't we just go out together on Friday night? I ignored her pleas and went to the patio to relax with a beer. I spent the night in the guest room. And the rest of the week listening to Sandra's sad laments, which echoed throughout the evening. The next day Sandra's sister Patricia Donnie called me. Is it true that you plan to go out with another woman this week? You cannot do that to Sandra. Patricia, she loves you so much. It is clear that you are not fully aware on the matter or have not heard the entire narrative. Your sister agreed to have a date with a coworker without consulting me. She arrived home and simply stated her plans with no concern for my feelings or the stability of our marriage. I've decided to go on a date myself and then reassess our relationship. I've been faithful to Sandra from the day I met her. However, I'm not sure whether I can stay in a marriage where my wife desires other men. That's a challenge I'm working to overcome. Do you understand, Patricia? Yes, Donnie, I do. I didn't realize she could act that effortlessly. Please have patience with her. She may not even be aware of the pain she is bringing you. And they may believe it's inconsequential. Patricia, I am exercising patience. Despite my pain, I have not taken any severe steps, but she must deal with the consequences of her conduct. Following Patricia's intervention, I answered aggressively. Sandra finally understood the significance of her actions and how they affected our relationship and my feelings. She sincerely apologized and pleaded with me to reconsider, encouraging me to cancel our scheduled dates. However, I was determined to re-establish balance and understanding in our marriage. The knowledge that one's wife wants another man is a heartbreaking blow. I wouldn't wish this on anyone unless you've walked in my shoes. Please wait judgment on my decisions. I planned for Mary to pick me up that night so she could meet my wife and ensure that it was acceptable for her to accompany a married guy on Friday night. Despite Sandra's reluctance to go out with her coworker, I pushed that she keep her pledge to Matthew. She balked at the term boyfriend. wanting to persuade me that he was only an acquaintance. Sandra dressed stylishly for her date, wearing a cute dress that highlighted her natural attractiveness. I found refuge in the fact that she did not try to be particularly appealing, which gave me hope for our relationship. Despite my reservations about seeing Mary, I suggested Sandra welcome my date to confirm our move to an open marriage. Despite her protests, I dismissed the idea of feeling justified in my actions. Sandra's surprise was evident when Mary came promptly at 6 p.m. Mary stood in stark contrast to Sandra, who was tight and demure. Sandra was overshadowed by Mary's tall, toned physique. Mary's outfit left little to the imagination. Her abundant proportions drew attention while I wore a fitting sports jacket that emphasized my athletic build. Ignoring Sandra's uneasiness, I even coaxed her into taking a couple shots of Mary and me together, which aggravated her. We presented an attractive couple as if they were posing for a fitness magazine cover. Sandra was clearly consumed with jealousy and hatred, realizing the Pandora's box she had unlocked might not be. I hid my delight as I introduced Mary in Sandra. I smirked inwardly at Mary's warm greeting. "Sandra, it's nice to meet you. Donnie acknowledged your open marriage and expressed real happiness for you. I'd had my eye on this lovely man for a year, so you can imagine how excited I was when he called on Sunday. I understand. You have also found a new boyfriend. Good for you." Mary's statements appeared harmless enough, but I could almost see Sandra's fury bubbling beneath the surface. We couldn't construct a response before the doorbell interrupted us. Sandra's serenity wavered and Matthew came, and I noticed her anxiousness as I assured him inside. I couldn't help but be astonished by Sandra's decision. Matthew was roughly 5'7", which was nearly the same height as Sandra in her 4-inch heels. He lacked appeal, and I couldn't understand what Sandra found in him. Wayne's hair is receding and costs no more than £150. He didn't pose a physical threat, but his presence strained our connection. I could tell Matthew was intimidated as I towered over him, his hand little and clammy, and mine exaggeratedly shaking. "My wife is ready for your date night. Enjoy yourself," I said. My tone conveyed a tinge of mischief, leaving Matthew stunned and seeking comfort from Sandra. Mary and I laughed as we left, fully aware of the tempest gathering within Sandra. I did not feel any remorse. If anything, I hoped this would lead to a resolution. When I returned home the next morning, Mary dropped me off around 6 a.m. as we said our good-byes on the driveway. Sandra witnessed our farewell kiss from the window, which I was positive lasted. Mary and I had had a wonderful evening together, beginning with a great meal and continuing with dancing at one of her favorite clubs and a romantic stroll down the shore. It had been an interesting night, from the club's closing to breakfast before she brought me home. Mary proved to be an interesting companion and outstanding dancer with a great sense of humor and undeniable charm. Our chemistry was evident and her kisses were electric. Although our encounter did not go beyond a kiss, I couldn't dismiss the possibility of an exciting relationship with Mary. However, Sandra remained the overriding notion in my head throughout the night. Even as we danced, memories of my wife invaded my mind. Walking down the beach, which reminded me of Sandra and me in Hawaii, elicited bitter-sweet feelings within me. Every moment, except for the lingering goodnight kiss, was dominated by Sandra's thoughts. With a mix of joy and despair, I entered my house, wondering if it would ever feel like home again. Sandra was waiting for me as I entered the house. Without a preface, she began an accusation. "Nice kiss. What else have you done all night?" She spat, disregarding her fury. I greeted her calmly. "Good morning, Sandra. How was your date? Matthew seems like a decent guy. Did you sleep with her? She erupted, her voice full of rage. Sandra, this was just our first date. You should know better than to leave to conclusions. I replied, seeking to diffuse the atmosphere. First date. Are you planning on seeing her again? She demanded. I am not sure. Are you planning on seeing your lover again? I countered. Of course not. I do not want him. I want you. She confessed through tears. Well, you appeared to want him last week. What has changed? I inquired. My voice contains a trace of impatience. I realized I was being dumb for believing I could simply hang out with a guy like I would with one of my girlfriends, you know. Having fun. But then you had to show off that supermodel in front of me. She sobbed while clutching a tissue from the pile on the couch. It was clear she had spent the night crying and waiting for my return. Sandra appeared to have realized the significance of her conduct, and perhaps she truly saw her outing with Matthew as nothing more than spending time with a friend, similar to going out with one of her girlfriends. After all, Matthew did not pose a threat, and in retrospect I could have overreacted. However, the thought that any woman would expect her husband to be okay with her going out with another man, even if it was innocent, confused me. I drew Sandra closer into my embrace. Sandra, I adore you, but I cannot bear the thought of being with a woman who wants other guys under any conditions. I will not tolerate adultery, and if it occurs again, if you lie to me or breach my confidence, I will not hesitate to break her marriage. Do you understand? As I spoke, I maintained a hard look on her. Sandra returned the embrace, kissing me. Yes, dear, I'd never cheat on you. I have never desired anyone other than you. This was a different circumstance. You still haven't told me about your evening with Matthew. What happened? I asked, eager for clarity. It was not a date. You had a date with that woman. We ate dinner. Matthew was so rattled after meeting you and injured his hand that he insisted on taking me home right away. It was not enjoyable, and I had a terrible time. He dropped me off before 8 p.m., and I've been here thinking about what you could have been doing with her all night and then seeing you kiss her like that. She trailed off, tears falling. Again. I hugged Sandra, assuring her that everything would be fine, despite the gravity of the situation. I couldn't help but laugh inwardly at the prospect of Matthew facing his muscle-bound competitor. My firm handshake with him had given me confidence that he would be the ideal gentleman that evening, which is why I insisted on meeting him before Mary and I left Sandra, for the time being. Let us put last night's events behind us. But I am serious about obtaining counseling. There are some things I still don't understand, and you should understand my emotions as well. If we can work through this and rebuild trust, I will not see Mary or any of the other women who keep asking me out. I stated seriously. Sandra's eyes widened as she realized Mary was not her only concern. I returned to sleeping in her bed, marking a return to normalcy and clarity. Counseling proved invaluable in our scenario. Mrs. Stewart created a sensitive and supportive environment. She calmly explained to Sandra how her actions had left me feeling unimportant and hurt. Sandra attempted to stress that she had not seen Matthew as a love interest, but rather as a friend. She said that she had never described their outing as a date, but rather as a night out with her buddy Matthew, similar to spending time with one of her girlfriends. Sandra only learned the value of limits in a monogamous relationship from Mrs. Stewart, and that spending time with other men at the expense of her husband was inappropriate. Sandra attempted to explain that my decision to date another woman was vengeful, particularly because the woman in question was clearly more gorgeous and lovely. She claimed that it was unfair and unjust. Mrs. Stewart stepped in, sharing insights from my perspective and opinions that helped calm Sandra's anxiety when it was my turn to address the issue. I admitted that I now understood Sandra's motives, but I maintained my position against her spending time with other men. I turned to Sandra and spoke sternly. Sandra, I adore you, but you broke my heart when you discussed going out with Matthew. My military training instincts took over, and I felt impelled to fight back. If you were thinking about seeing other men, I felt forced to reciprocate by dating other women. It was not a decision I wanted to make, and I hate that it happened. However, the obligation rests with you. If a similar situation develops in the future, you will have divorce papers on the table within a week. I will not tolerate infidelity. I understand that you might not have seen it as a date, which is why I'm willing to work on her marriage, but take this as a caution. Never attempt something like that again. Following the furious conversation, there was a noticeable shift in our dynamic. Sandra became more sensitive to my feelings, and our communication improved. We turned this crazy experience into a spark for strengthening our marriage. Our therapy sessions lasted several months, and we developed new ways to prioritize each other in our relationship. Mary demonstrated tremendous empathy and took the initiative to contact Sandra, assuring her that she would not pursue her husband. She made it obvious that while she would step back, she was willing to step in if Sandra ever decided to stop things with me. Sandra came to a profound revelation about the significance of her acts and the probable loss of our relationship. She recognized the significance of our relationship and the ramifications of her decisions. She never again gave cause for envy or entertained the idea of being with another man. She understood the importance of a committed partnership and accepted responsibility for her actions. While Sandra and Matthew maintained their friendship, Matthew was hesitant to make attempts or pursue a love relationship for fear of violating boundaries. Reflecting on the circumstances, I realized that sometimes ladies struggle to understand conventional thinking. Here is the next story. As Christmas approached, a time that often brings me delight, I found myself in a difficult circumstance. Life has not been kind to me, despite my best efforts to be good to others. Some may reply, "Welcome to the club, my friend," but the situation has grown extremely dismal. I used to believe that infidelity was mostly a male issue, but now I realize that women are also capable of it. I do not want to make sweeping generalizations, but I am speaking from personal experience. The event progressed in such a way that my girlfriend appeared to dislike him completely. But after installing a covert camera, the truth became apparent. It became clear that when I went to work, he had covertly entered my apartment and became engaged with my girlfriend. This guy used to live next door but was arrested and needed somewhere to stay for a few weeks. I frequently questioned why he kept lingering around us after I kicked him out. He began showing up in locations we frequented, and I wondered who was informing him of his whereabouts. He seemed to be wearing a GPS tracker and was always keeping an eye on us. But finally, the truth emerged. It happened one morning as I finished my shower and prepared for work. My girlfriend was also taking a shower. Suddenly, her phone received a text message notice. In a normal situation, I wouldn't have paid much attention, but my partner was using a new phone with a strange ringtone. I checked the sender and it was Patrick, my former roommate who had recently been released from prison. We were buddies in high school while both living in Queens. We have many common memories and experiences. Patrick lived with me for a few months before his prison sentence, but everything changed after my girlfriend moved in. He returned 2 months later and stayed with us. Unfortunately, we had a falling out, so I asked him to leave. He was only intended to stay for 2 weeks, but it stretched into 2 months, and paying over $2,000 for a small, 2-bedroom apartment in New York was already challenging. Because he sat on the couch in the living room, there was a lack of personal space, making communication difficult. In January, we intended to sign a new lease and relocate to a better, more expensive apartment. Next month, my girlfriend will be able to welcome her family and friends without feeling embarrassed. It is crucial to clarify that Patrick and my girlfriend did not have a close relationship. She was supportive when I asked him to leave. They met lately when I let him stay with us briefly, so I was startled to see him texting her that morning. I didn't even realize they were texting. A notification appeared on my phone screen displaying their chat. My name is Caleb, and my girlfriend and I knew a Patrick, but she didn't know anyone else with that name. In addition, her friend Patrick, whom I had not before known, inquired about another Caleb. Felt like a huge coincidence. I realized she was talking to my former neighbor, whom I had kicked out 2 weeks ago owing to his extended stay. I couldn't foresee a relationship between my fiancé and Patrick, especially because she agreed with my choice to remove him out of our life. But the feeling of discomfort persisted, implying that something was awry. I never considered romance. Perhaps they went out together for a smoke or another activity. He had talent for other things, but he was obsessed with being a rapper and spending money on studio time. When he lost his employment, he always returned to street dealing and illegal narcotics, but he was never arrested and only served short prison sentences. This cycle repeated indefinitely. Allow me to paint a picture for you. I grew up in a predominantly impoverished area, where my parents are still happily married. As a child, I struggled financially, yet I never went hungry. I am grateful to having grown up in a varied community that exposed me to several cultures. The majority of my friends during my formative years were of African heritage. I didn't imagine I'd have a relationship with someone of a different race because all of my past partners were African American, but fate had different intentions. It all began around 1.5 years ago when I met my present girlfriend while working as a courier. We exchanged funny remarks and I jokingly invited her out. Expecting to be rejected, I became a delivery driver, which eventually led to our love. She's a wonderful young professional in her early 20s with a stunning figure that accentuates her beauty. When we initially met, she lived in a posh neighborhood with a neighbor. I'm a simple person who doesn't require much in life, just enough money to pay the rent. And a devoted girlfriend who will not cheat on me while I work hard. At first, I felt I had found it all in my present girlfriend and I treasured our time together. After 7 months of dating, I completely trusted her. We felt like we could create a steady future together, which meant no more pricey dates, pubs, and clubs. At the time, I had a roommate named Patrick, but the lease was exclusively in my name. Patrick was unable to sign the lease due to his poor credit and lack of renting history. My lease expired after 8 months and my girlfriend's agreement was related to her neighbors. We both agreed that when her lease expired in 4 months, we would look for new and better housing. It was our next move as a pair. She wanted to reside on the East Village or Lower East Side, which is comparable to where she currently lives. I resided in Washington Heights, which she did not enjoy. Fortunately, her job was in the East Village, which matched her desire to be close work. My delivery job did not bind me to a specific place, but I did have to consider the apartment my partner preferred, even though it cost $1,500 more than my existing one. A single Bedroom cost around $3,500. The plan was for her to temporarily move in with me and my neighbor. After her lease expired. After my lease expired, we'd move to the apartment she preferred. Patrick had hoped to become famous in music since he was 16, but it had yet to materialize. Despite investing money on studio time, his music went largely unnoticed and he was trapped in a maddening loop. He skipped steady occupations in favor of buying and selling sweets. This resulted in failed sweetie exams and job losses which delayed rent payments. Unfortunately, I let him move in, which I now regret. After being dismissed, he turned to selling sweets on the streets to make ends meet. And he was frequently jailed. This pattern has been going on since he was 16 and I felt dumb for allowing him to get so close to me. Predictably, 4 months before the lease expired, he was arrested and imprisoned. I was the only one on the lease, thus I was responsible for the rent. Despite his many arrests, I allowed him to stay with me. Unfortunately, he remained in prison. I thought he'd change and get a career like mine, but he was determined to succeed in the music industry. In brief, when my girlfriend's lease expired, she moved in with me and we began a new chapter as a relationship. We lived together for a while, but our quiet life was upended a month later, when Patrick was released early from prison. Surprisingly, when Patrick returned, his belongings were missing from our shared flat. Patrick had nowhere to go and wanted to stay with me for 2 weeks. Until he could figure things out and move in with relatives. Given our limited space, I paused. I told him that our 2-bedroom apartment was already too cramped for me and my fiancée and that adding another person would make matters worse. However, after discussing with my girlfriend, we agreed that she had never met Patrick and knew only what I had told her about him. Surprisingly, he moved in the same day. I made it clear that my girlfriend's consent was contingent on him remaining for only 2 weeks. He agreed, promising to remain discreet. Surprisingly, within a week, he had learned to being a respectful couch surfer, not encroaching on our privacy and returning when we were getting ready for bed. Although we rarely saw him, we knew he was there and admired his efforts to keep his belongings organized. So we didn't notice the first 2 weeks had passed. But in the 3rd and 4th weeks, I would get home late from work to find him watching TV with my girlfriend. While there was nothing wrong with it, I found it unusual. He knew I'd be late and timed his arrivals accordingly. I assumed he had a cordial connection with my girlfriend, but they rarely spoke when I was there. Despite our best attempts to keep things tidy, our small apartment nevertheless seemed crowded and suffocating. As the 5th week approached, I got more anxious that Patrick had extended his stay beyond the allotted 2 weeks. I felt for my girlfriend and assured her that he would go as planned. One evening, while lying in bed, I decided to confront her about the matter. I wanted to apologize on Patrick's behalf and reduce the tension in the air. Although Patrick had not caused any problems between us, the cramped living arrangements looked to have an effect on our intimate friendship. It had been 4 weeks since our previous closeness, and I felt compelled to confront it. I wanted to discuss Patrick's failure to keep his initial 2-week pledge with my partner. I expected her to support me or at least reply. But instead she turned away and went to bed, as if I were in her way. On reflection, I remembered that life was normal for the first 3 days after Patrick moved into our bed. However, on the 4th day, she began to refuse bedtime. Given that my partner was normally busy at those times, I assumed her behavior was related to discomfort. During Patrick's 3-day stay with us, she became noticeably noisy during proximity moments, although knowing he was in the living room. I was struck by the fact that for The first 3 days after he arrived, our bedtime routine was especially loud, almost as if she was on purpose. Surprisingly, starting on the 4th day, it considerably increased my self-esteem. My partner routinely refused any bedtime activities, often using Patrick's presence as an excuse. It was unusual because she hadn't been as cautious in the first 3 days. Despite Patrick's presence in the living room, I didn't think much about it, but after 6 weeks, I conveyed my displeasure to Patrick, telling him that his time was finished. It disturbed me that my partner continued to avoid bedtime because of him. I noticed his persistent presence, which looked like a purposeful sort of retribution. Almost 2 months had gone, and she was still making the excuse that we had a guest in our apartment. I reminded Patrick that he had agreed to depart a month earlier, but he cleverly moved the responsibility to other concerns and persuaded me to let him stay another week. Furthermore, I recall other instances in which Patrick and my girlfriend were both missing for extended periods of time, which made me anxious. One time, I decided to leave work early, since I was feeling ill. My partner normally arrived home around 5:30 p.m., so I went to the apartment door and unlocked it. I heard disturbance inside the flat and suspected a break-in because neither Patrick nor my girlfriend were generally home at the time. I rushed inside and noticed the television was turned on. Patrick pretended to be immersed in it, but any spectator could see his weird and uncomfortable demeanor. Meanwhile, the sound of running water signaled that my girlfriend was in the shower. This unusual situation raised suspicions that something nefarious was going on between them. Although I lacked clear evidence, their presence in the apartment at the time was enough to raise suspicions. Plus, I was confident that my partner would not engage in such actions to handle the matter. I asked my girlfriend about her early return home. Her response was that she took a half-day off work. There, the explanation did not persuade me, and I was dissatisfied because of my terrible health that day. I didn't investigate the subject as deeply as I should have, but I couldn't shake the idea that there was a link between them. The following day, my girlfriend abruptly brought up my talk with Patrick about him moving out. To my astonishment, she acted as a middleman for him, asking that we extend the deadline by a week or more and not put him under pressure. Given that we were leaving the apartment in January, I thought it was weird that he utilized her as an intermediary to extend his stay with us. He had previously pledged only 2 weeks, and I expected him to fulfill his word. I had already spent a significant amount of time away from my typical surroundings and bed life, and now she was suddenly on his side. This incident severely disturbed me, and our disagreement over it did not continue long. Thankfully, she eventually admitted I was correct. At times, it felt like I was on my own in my attitude, and I was concerned that if we let him, he would become a chronic freeloader, continually sleeping on the couch to evade his rent duties. Sometimes, I wished he was back in prison. He had a knack for finding trouble quickly, and he had a habit of putting himself in it. This all occurred in November during the same week that we spent together looking for the right wedding ring. It was a well-planned event that we had been working on for weeks. Selection, which included her in the ring, was intended to ensure her complete delight and pride in wearing it for the remainder of her life. At least, that was the plan. We had been talking about getting married even before she moved in with me, and we had been methodically preparing it for weeks before to this time. Our ultimate idea is to sign a lease for a new apartment in December. I decided to propose on Valentine's Day in January, knowing how much she enjoys romantic gestures. In the evening, we went to acquire wedding rings. We finally had the chance to be close. After a 7-week hiatus, it was a special reward for purchasing the rings and a gentle reminder of the closeness we had lost due to the guest in the living room. The following week just fueled my desire for the closeness we enjoyed. I borrowed $4,500 from my savings, totaling $401,000 to purchase the engagement ring she desired. To surprise her on Valentine's Day, I kept it hidden somewhere she wouldn't find it accidentally. But the next day, my girlfriend reminded me that it had been nearly 2 months since Patrick began living with us, which caught me off guard. In the evening, I met with Patrick and told him he had only one day to find another place to live, or I would have to remove his belongings myself. He claimed he had nowhere to go, which irritated me. I conveyed to him that it was not my problem. At that moment, my girlfriend emerged from the bedroom and our voices grew louder. I aggressively pushed Patrick to cease relying on me and locate a place to live or turn to his relatives for aid. It was clear that his relatives didn't want him around due to his unreliability. Even his acquaintances in our social circle, who, as it turned out, were of African descent, didn't want to accept him. The confrontation escalated, nearly turning physical. I warned him that if he didn't leave my flat that night, there would be consequences. I decided to contact the authorities to ensure they would handle this situation properly by putting him behind bars. I expressed my disappointment at making it clear that his lack of gratitude prevented me from helping him. He left that evening, but returned the next morning to pick up his things. By the end of November, it was clear that he was out of my life for good. There were rumors that he found shelter in a rundown house about 2 miles away from me, which wasn't surprising, given the lack of support from his acquaintances. But it puzzled me that he didn't seek refuge with his relatives instead of living in a place that could lead him back to prison. I couldn't fathom his reasoning. I often wondered why he insisted on staying in the area, despite the lack of job opportunities and the high costs of maintaining the studio for his unsuccessful music career. It was in the first week of December that I discovered why he was so determined to stay. I was at a bar with my girlfriend when I saw him discreetly leaving the room. His presence there struck me as odd. This scenario repeated several times in different places, and I later found out my girlfriend had been exchanging text messages with him. This discovery made me wonder if he was tracking our location through GPS, as he often showed up in places where we were trying to avoid him, trying to make sense of this unsettling situation when I mentioned it to my girlfriend in a joking manner. To my surprise, she admitted that she found his behavior disturbing and creepy as well. I learned that she had given him our location, allowing them to meet secretly and have closeness relations in my car while I waited inside an establishment, completely unaware of her actions. This incident occurred during our second visit to her parents in upstate New York. The first visit had been unpleasant due to her father's disapproval of me. My girlfriend informed me that he preferred her to marry a man with a higher education, not someone like me. While his words were different, his intentions were clear. I realized that was the message he wanted to convey. Her father, an arrogant and irritable college professor, believed he was superior to me. He saw himself as an intellectual giant. He constantly lectured me and treated me as a suspect. I disliked him, and it was evident that he thought his daughter deserved someone better. Despite my girlfriend's efforts to make her father accept me, it became clear that we wouldn't see eye to eye. She wanted us to visit her parents' home before Christmas so they could get to know me before we celebrated the holidays together. I tried to be polite to her parents, but they proved quite challenging. They expressed a desire to visit my girlfriend and see where she lived now, but she insisted they wait until we moved to a Nicer apartment in the East Village or Lower East Side. She was afraid that if they saw the condition of our neighborhood and apartment, they would be disappointed. We were planning to sign a lease for a new apartment in 2 weeks, just a few days before Christmas. The following week, I found a notification from Patrick on my girlfriend's newly purchased phone without knowing the nature of their communication. I saved a record of the message. My main feeling was confusion, rather than suspicion, as I'd never seen my girlfriend as someone who would betray my trust. As she finished her shower, I wanted to capture the text message as proof while driving to work. My thoughts were preoccupied with the dynamics of the relationship between my girlfriend and Patrick. I had many questions about his messages, particularly the ones about my work schedule, which raised suspicions about a possible connection between them. I recalled how she used to be vocally expressive during our closeness moments while Patrick lived in my apartment. I couldn't help but think about how she chose her outfits when Patrick was around. The lack of bed life, which she attributed to Patrick's presence, also weighed on my mind. I remembered numerous instances when I unexpectedly returned home to find both of them in the house. I thought about his sudden appearances in various places and her unexplained disappearances for short periods of time. Gradually, everything began to make sense in my suspicions of their affair intensified even before my work shift ended. Throughout the day, I wrestled with my emotions of worthlessness, anger, and confusion. I desperately hoped that my conclusions were wrong, as my life revolved around this woman. Without her, I might have moved to Florida by now. A friend in Florida had made me a tempting offer 3 months ago, offering $500 a day after taxes for transporting cars in a certain region of the United States. However, as my relationship with my girlfriend deepened, I understood her reluctance to leave New York and her family. I made the resolute decision to stay in my apartment. On the same day, I received a text notification. I decided to verify my suspicions. To do that, I chose to buy a pair of high-quality hidden video cameras with excellent resolution. The plan was to discreetly install them in my bedroom and living room to remotely monitor the situation through Wi-Fi and receive real-time updates on my phone. Capitalizing on the evening while she slept soundly, I expertly placed the cameras in their designated spots with great care. I connected them to the Wi-Fi network, ensuring uninterrupted communication with my mobile device before heading to work the next morning. I carefully checked the cameras, ensuring they remained hidden and operated optimally. I strategically concealed the cameras in various spots and then left with my phone, ensuring it was synchronized. Typically, my girlfriend and I had different work schedules. She left for work at 7 in the morning and I left at 5, so I expected several days would pass before the cameras recorded any significant events. However, I was shocked by the reality. Just half an hour after I left the apartment, the camera's motion sensor went off like crazy. At that moment, I was leaving the subway. I stood in the middle of the station trying to comprehend the shocking scene unfolding on my phone. Initially, I thought it was my girlfriend who had triggered the motion sensor. But when I looked at my phone, I saw Patrick's presence on the screen. To my bewilderment, he was already in my apartment, passionately kissing my girlfriend. In the bustling living room, commuters hurried by, paying no attention to the heartbreaking scene I was witnessing. And I stood there in complete bewilderment. How could this happen? Then it dawned on me that Patrick must have been hiding nearby, patiently waiting for me to leave for work. My girlfriend was standing there completely naked, draped only in a white towel over her head. I was at a loss, unable to comprehend the betrayal unfolding before my eyes. As I weaved through the crowd, my legs grew weaker and eventually I had to find a seat at the nearest station. To my amazement, they began engaging in closeness acts right on the couch in my living room. I was both surprised and captivated by their ease and comfort. It was evident that this affair had been ongoing for a long time, all unbeknownst to me. The realization that I was running late for work suddenly hit me, yet I felt a strange indifference. It seemed that at that moment, my life had lost all meaning. Everything I once treasured was shattered and I felt utterly defeated. The rage inside me reached a boiling point and I was overwhelmed by an irresistible desire to seek revenge against these two individuals. While watching the camera recording, my supervisor suddenly called, causing the recording to pause. I was annoyed by his interruption, but he questioned my lateness and warned of potential consequences if I didn't arrive within 30 minutes. This skepticism and anger led me to impulsively quit my job, abruptly ending the conversation when my supervisor attempted to contact me again. I intentionally ignored his call until the subway neared its destination. By then, I realized they had already finished their actions and I thought with regret about the time it would take me to get back home. I couldn't believe their audacity. As the subway train continued its journey, I couldn't shake the feelings of betrayal and regret washing over me. My girlfriend, whom I trusted and loved, had deceived me in the most terrible way. The thought that she had gone to work as usual that morning filled me with a bitter mix of anger and disappointment. It was a stark reminder of my own ignorance, failing to see the truth that was unfolding right before my eyes. Minutes passed, and the adrenaline that had fueled my impulsive job resignation gradually dissipated. It was replaced by a wave of regret and self-doubt. I couldn't help but chastise myself for making such a hasty decision. I suddenly realized how important my job was to me. Deep down, I understood that it would be futile to seek my old position back. The damage had been done and it seemed too late to salvage what I had lost. The weight of my mistake pressed heavily on me during that solitary subway ride. Before this incident, I had always viewed my girlfriend as loyal and devoted. The idea that she might betray me had never crossed my mind. And now, I had to confront the painful truth that she had been having an affair with a man I considered my friend. Disbelief and heartache intertwined, making that subway ride the saddest of my life. I had always shown kindness to these people, repeatedly offering my assistance, even when his family had rejected him. I had shown understanding, but in return, my girlfriend and friend treated me cruelly. How could I trust a woman who had an affair with my friend? The idea of proposing to her on Valentine's Day as I returned to my apartment seemed unthinkable. Early in the morning, around 8 a.m., I removed my work clothes and collapsed on the bed, crying like a helpless child. It felt as though all my achievements had been wiped away and I was essentially starting from scratch. I found myself in a tough spot. I had lost my job and my girlfriend and now I was uncertain about what to do when the lease on my apartment expired. Moving in with my ex-girlfriend wasn't an option due to our breakup. And without a higher-paying job, I wouldn't be able to afford my apartment in 2 months. Finding another job was challenging, especially with so many candidates vying for the same positions. I had already informed my landlord about my intention to move out and now I was in a state of limbo. Although I briefly considered reaching out to my former employer in the hopes of being rehired, I was pretty sure I had already been fired. Even if I were to apologize, it seemed unlikely that it would salvage the situation with the abundance of candidates interested in the job. Thankfully, Florida offered a glimmer of hope in the midst of my despair. I decided to change my circumstances and turn to a friend who, along with his wife, ran a car transportation company in Florida. Although he had previously offered me a driver's position, I had declined due to my girlfriend's reluctance to leave New York. However, now desperate for a fresh start, I reached out to my friend. Unfortunately, he didn't answer my call, prompting me to contact his wife, who played a significant role in the business. She managed the company's website, handled accounts receivable and took phone calls when her husband was on the road. She informed me that there was still an open position and asked if I could come to Florida. I agreed and said I could visit the next day to inspect the place. As a result, I planned to book a ticket to Florida. Currently, I had $3,500 in my bank account, and by returning the engagement ring today, I would receive a $4,500 compensation, giving me a total of $8,000. While contemplating my future, I began to feel a sense of optimism. The idea of leaving without informing my ex-girlfriend was becoming increasingly appealing. I wondered if anyone could truly understand my dire situation. I received strong recommendations to follow this path, with the main advice being to leave. Endure the shocks, relinquish the desire for revenge, and disappear from her life completely. I had pondered this idea for a while, but it initially seemed too simplistic to me. My anger towards both her and her lover fueled my desire for revenge. Yet in the end, I recognized the most crucial aspect of this plan, ending it all and severing all ties with her. Never to meet or communicate with her again. My vanishing act was tied to her repeated attempts to contact me, and I longed for it all to be over, wanting to see her reaction personally. Surprisingly, the guys involved also longed for closure. I spent the entire day alone in my apartment, providing ample time to contemplate the actions of both my girlfriend and the former friend, who had turned out to be my roommate. As a result, I concluded that the most appropriate retaliation would be to keep all information about my intentions to myself and reveal the news to her at the very last moment when she least expected it. When I returned home that evening, I could barely contain the urge to engage in an argument with her. In my eyes, she appeared malicious, vile, and wicked. I couldn't fathom her motives for such a betrayal. Despite losing all affection and desire for her, I decided to maintain a facade of indifference, pretending that I was unaware of anything. That night, as we lay together, restless thoughts consumed my mind. What could have driven her to such actions against a man she had professed her love for? It occurred to me that perhaps this affair had started only a week after his arrival. And I wondered if it served as a means to humiliate and disgrace me. She may have been intrigued by being with a man of a different race. Like indulging in a forbidden fruit or conducting an experiment. I couldn't think of any other reason for her actions. Before going to bed, I informed her that I had to go on a 4-day business trip to Florida, as required by my company. I suggested she sign an apartment rental agreement in my absence, assuring her that I would sign an addendum when I returned. The leasing company had already checked our credit and our combined income was sufficient for the housing. She agreed to the plan. I booked a flight to Florida which turned out to be the most expensive ticket I'd ever purchased. However, despite the cost, it was worth it because I couldn't stand living in the same apartment with my girlfriend any longer. The thought of her infidelity in my own bed while I was at work disgusted me. It was unnerving to realize that my girlfriend was most interested in the timing of my flight, presumably to inform her lover of the ideal time for their rendezvous. I couldn't help but wonder how long she intended to continue this affair. Having once proposed to her, I contemplated the future with our story continue in our new apartment. Would it proceed after marriage in the formation of a family? These thoughts made me grateful that I wouldn't be around for those significant moments feeling despondent. I decided to create some distance from her. The next morning, I told her that I had to leave early, even though I had rearranged the camera the day before to capture a better view of our living room and bedroom. I ensured that I saved a video recording of their activities on a portable hard drive. It was almost predictable. As soon as I left the apartment, Patrick, her partner in the affair, wasted no time entering. Their actions fell into a routine. Fortunately, a strategically placed hidden camera managed to capture their facial expressions, her loud and obnoxious screams, and even their closeness moments. What surprised me most was their complete disregard for protection. It was thoughtless of her to put my health at such risk. Besides, Patrick had recently been released from prison, and I couldn't help but wonder about the diseases he might have contracted there. In my unstable life situation, I was concerned about potential health risks, especially regarding various diseases. With this in mind, I mentally noted that I would definitely get tested upon arriving in Florida just before boarding the flight. I managed to get in touch with my friend who explained the driver job opportunity in detail. Luckily, I already had a CDA license, so I only needed additional training to upgrade my skills. While it won't be easy to drive across the entire country, I genuinely enjoyed being behind the wheel, and the compensation is nearly 3 times what I used to earn. Plus, I dream of owning a spacious house in Florida with a large backyard, a far cry from New York where most of my income goes into renting. Such real estate won't come cheap, even though I'm unsure about the exact date of my trip. I have enough time to contemplate my next steps. Maybe I should heed my friend's father's advice and return to school once I've saved up enough for tuition. Right now, everything feels uncertain and unresolved. I'm overwhelmed with emotions, making it hard to make a rational decision. I have video recordings of those 2 days when something unexpected occurred, and I've saved these recordings on my portable hard drive. The hidden camera I used activates when there's movement, meaning it only records when there's motion detected. The camera's memory was sufficient to keep recording until I returned from my 4-day trip to Florida. Upon arriving in Florida in the evening, I discovered that my friend had left for deliveries and decided to take a cab to his house. To my surprise, his wife was home. My friend and his family live in a magnificent Florida residence, and seeing their prosperity filled me with joy. We grew up together in Queens, so their success felt even more remarkable. Comparing their grand home to my small New York apartment couldn't help but seem comical. Nevertheless, I felt optimistic about embarking on this new chapter of my life in this place. During our conversation, my friend expressed strong disapproval of Patrick, whom he had warned me to stay away from many years ago. Unfortunately, I didn't heed his advice. Ironically, I now find myself grateful to Patrick for revealing my girlfriend's true nature. If it hadn't been for him, someone else might have uncovered her deception. Who's to say it could have been another person of African descent? During my visit to my friend's house in Florida, I decided to review the recordings from my camera. In the evening, to my complete shock, I saw Patrick in my home, eating my food, occupying my bed, and engaging in closeness activities with my girlfriend on the same bed. The depth of this betrayal became unbearable. Initially, I had planned to address it with her after she moved to a new apartment, but witnessing this blatant lack of respect in my own bed pushed me over the edge. Yet I realized that taking matters into my own hands would lead to negative consequences. The thought of seeking revenge crossed my mind, but I quickly recognized the potential fallout, such as ending up in prison for a significant portion of my life. Instead, the next day, I decided to contact her father and give him the keys to my apartment. My plan was to include videos that showed his daughter engaging in a closeness relationship with a person of another race to provoke a strong emotional reaction. I began making duplicate keys to my apartment the next morning. I saved and transferred the recording of their closeness encounter to a USB drive. On the same day, I sent it to her father using an express delivery service. Initially, I had considered contacting her father directly, but I lacked his contact information. Then I searched for her on the college's website, but only found the number to his office. I persistently called his office multiple times until he finally answered. He recognized me and I took the opportunity to reveal the truth about his daughter. I explained that she had asked me to accompany her on a trip to visit relatives. Emphasizing that we weren't romantically involved, just friends with benefits. I was one of her many lovers, the person she lived with and dealt in illegal substances. I informed him that as a gesture of goodwill, I had made copies of her apartment keys and suggested he visit her at 8 p.m., the optimal time. I intentionally didn't mention the presence of video recordings, unsure of how to explain that aspect. After our phone conversation, he remained silent. I assumed he might be shocked by the unexpected information I had shared, and was awaiting the inevitable consequences. Alternatively, he could suspect it was a hoax, although I strongly doubted it. Perhaps it was due to the extensive information I provided. I was sure that upon receiving the package he would believe me, though I wasn't certain if everything would go according to plan. While going about my own business, I took the opportunity to familiarize myself with the upcoming living arrangements. My friend's wife kindly briefed me on how their business operated, essentially bringing me up to speed. Late in the afternoon, my friend returned and his family and I went out for dinner to avoid drawing attention to my own situation. I turned off the camera notifications. However, around 9 or 10 o'clock in the evening, something suddenly struck me. I decided to discreetly check the camera while dining with my friend and his family. Given the sensitive nature of this story, I didn't immediately share it with my friend. Stepping out of the restaurant, I quickly examined my phone and was pleasantly surprised that this was the moment I had been anticipated for my revenge against my unfaithful partner. To my amazement, her father unexpectedly arrived at my apartment, accompanied by 3 young men. Around 25 years old, assuming these were either his sons or their friends. I mentally replayed the scenario. They seemed caught off guard when they entered the living room. My ex-girlfriend and her lover were engrossed in watching TV, but their peaceful moment was shattered when her father and several men entered the room. Patrick, in a t-shirt, appeared. Bewildered, and my ex-girlfriend hurriedly attempted to cover herself, remaining in her underwear. Her father began berating her, expressing his disappointment with her lies about her boyfriend. In that tense moment, it seemed to me that I foolishly hoped for a different outcome, perhaps wishing that the situation could be resolved without resorting to physical measures. However, my ex-girlfriend didn't get the chance to express her thoughts. Her father categorically prevented her from doing so, showering Patrick with degrading insults, some of which were too offensive to repeat. I observed the bewildered look on her face as her father accused her of betraying her family and demanded an explanation for her actions. Her reaction was truly priceless. She appeared completely confounded, not knowing where to begin. I couldn't help but find the situation amusing, and her father's frustrated, angry and arrogant demeanor was incredibly satisfying to witness. It was hard to bear seeing a beloved child entangled in something he despised. Her father relentlessly scolded her, hurling degrading insults at Patrick, and seemed ready for a confrontation with 3 men accompanying him. It was clear he anticipated Patrick's involvement. It's no wonder he came prepared for any outcome. However, at the first opportunity, Patrick hastily retreated, leaving my ex-girlfriend alone. Her father continued his verbal onslaught, nearly disowning her, but not severing family ties. The most remarkable part is that I recorded the entire incident on video. After her father's departure, she was left in a state of shock and isolation, overwhelmed with emotion. She called me with tears in her eyes, anxiously asking when I would return. Little did she know that I had orchestrated this entire scenario forever, rupturing the bond between father and daughter. Their relationship would never be the same. And she had only me to blame for these irreversible changes. During our phone conversation, she expressed a desire to confess something but couldn't discuss it over the phone. I advised her to wait until my return home for a face-to-face conversation. I tried to console her, urging her to stop crying, and assuring her that I would be back in 2 days ready to listen to her problems. To my surprise, the next morning, she didn't invite Patrick for a closeness meeting. It seemed the fun had suddenly ended. As I later learned, she had no way to contact me. Despite this, I couldn't help but grin because she had brought this situation upon herself. Now she'd have to face the consequences of her actions. Later that day, I received the results of an STD test, which came back negative. It was on the day I was supposed to fly back to New York that she finally discovered I was the one responsible for unveiling the truth. Presumably, her mother had informed her about the situation as I headed to the airport, called me and admitted to her infidelity. I realized she had pieced it all together. She mentioned that I had gone to extreme lengths, secretly recording and destroying her family, which she considered unnecessary. I explained how she had wrecked my life, especially as I was on the brink of getting married. She somehow managed to find 2 hidden recording devices and threatened me with a lawsuit. Upon my return to New York, I decided to consult with my lawyer to determine if she had a valid claim. It remains uncertain whether she genuinely has one as an excuse for her unfaithfulness. She simply attributed it to a desire for better life, indicating that Patrick didn't matter to her at all. The way she spoke suggested an attempt to downplay the seriousness of the situation. It seemed as if she expected me to just move on. I made it clear that our relationship was over. Everything else had ended, and my intention was to return to New York, collect my belongings, and then relocate to Florida. In response, she threatened legal action for invasion of privacy and creating adult content out of revenge. I stood my ground and told her to go to hell. The only regret I have is that I didn't give her a chance to explain herself. I'm curious to know how her relationship with Patrick began. From what I gather, it probably started about a week after he moved in. It would be intriguing to hear the story from her perspective. I now reside in Florida, where I work in car transportation across the southern regions of the country, occasionally making stops in the north. The latest news about my ex-girlfriend reveals that she has finally found a new roommate. Her relationship with her father has completely disintegrated since he wants nothing to do with her. As for Patrick, his whereabouts are unknown. To be honest, I don't know. Nor am I interested in his fate. What matters most is that I've learned that things turned out terribly for my ex-girlfriend after my revenge and the strained relationship with her family. She suffered from severe stress and developed psoriasis. Her body and face were covered in painful rashes, causing not only discomfort, but also a loss of self-esteem. Once a beautiful girl, now she goes unnoticed by men. And I can't find it in me to feel sorry for her, given the pain and suffering she caused me in. Thank you for spending the time to hear today's story. If you enjoyed this essay, please like it and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have a tale to share regarding your or someone else's circumstance, please do not hesitate to contact me. Take care.